Hi, it's Kai. Today we are going to be continuing my series of cataloging or archiving my makeup and beauty collection, and we are going to be doing my eyeshadow palettes today. So this is basically an eyeshadow palette collection video. I'm pretty sure I'll do my single shadows in a different video because I have different formulas like creams and liquids, and I don't want to make this too long. But eyeshadows, and especially eyeshadow palettes, are one of my favorite parts of makeup. It's one of my biggest, I would say, collection of items, and even though I've decluttered some things over the years, I'll even look back at something that I decluttered with my eyeshadow and kind of be like, I don't know if I should have decluttered that. I do have quite a few discontinued products as well. Honestly, I would say a lot of my makeup collection in general is discontinued or like reformulated, but pre-reformulated products. So if you enjoy seeing older things, especially things that may have been limited edition or aren't available anymore, then it also might be fun to again go through my personal eyeshadow palette collection. And again, I have probably some stories behind some of them. I don't know if I'll declutter anything. I'll see if anything is again calling out to me to get rid of, but I'm pretty happy-ish outside of the fact that I have a whole bunch of eyeshadow and no one person should probably have this much eyeshadow. I'm personally really happy with my collection as it stands. I also have some Lysol wipes because I definitely know that things are dusty and need to be wiped down, and the baskets that are holding things need to be wiped down as well. So it'll be a little bit of maybe some cleaning ASMR as we go along as well. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Let me know what palettes you have in common with me. Do you have any of the same things in your collection? And let me know if there's anything you want to see me do tutorials with, or just get ready with me, shop my stash. I really need to bring back the shop my stash videos, so I will probably try to film one of those this month. But anyway, again, let's just hop into it. First off, I want to show where I store my palettes and the general, I guess, organization aspect of it. In my last video, I just kind of was off camera for most of it, but for this one, I feel like it might be easier, especially with the space that I'm working with, to show you guys generally where everything is located and stored, and then hold up the palettes as I go through, and then again clean off the ones that need to be cleaned off and can be cleaned off. So let me grab you guys really quick. Okie dokie, might not be the best angle necessarily, but again, this is the space that I'm working with right now. But generally over here, I have this little, I don't know, like shelf, desk, rolling cart thing that I keep a lot of my makeup on. And on the bottom little shelves is where I like to keep my eyeshadow palettes. So these bigger ones right here, 1, 2, 3. This one over here, this gray one, has, what do you call it, like face palettes and stuff, which we'll eventually do a video about. But all of my eyeshadow palettes are here in these 3 teal bins. They're very loosely organized by brand. Like I think you can see on the bottom shelf, I have my ABH palettes together, and then like my Melt Cosmetics palettes together. But I also have quite a few different brands of things, so some of them are just more organized by where they would fit personally. But this is where, again, everything is generally stored, and this organization works just fine for me. Okie dokie, now that we've got that out of the way, we can start with actually going through the individual palettes themselves. So this was this first basket that was on that top shelf, and in here I have again a lot of different assorted palettes. I also have a note from a fragrance friend. I need to go put this in another place. I really like, it's so hard for me when I get notes or postcards or anything like that for me to get rid of them. I had it in here when I was moving and everything, so that's just where it was, but I need to go put that somewhere safe. Anywho, starting with the larger-ish, I don't know if these are considered large. I feel like compared to a lot of what is being released now, these are larger palettes. But the first one I have here is the Huda Beauty Rose Gold. What is this? The Textured Shadow Palette Rose Gold Edition. I got this from my older sister. This was actually the first one that they came out with, the one that they discontinued and then remastered and re-released. I remember that kind of being a point of contention, or people kind of I guess, but that was the first, I feel like, really big controversy that Huda Beauty got in as a brand. People thought that the way they were sensationalizing, I'm just sitting here wiping off the palettes as we go, but people really thought that them kind of sensationalizing, discontinuing the palette just to bring back out a remastered or a updated, better formula according to them version of it. Again, a lot of people thought that that was kind of misleading, and again, that's what I remember as being one of the first large Huda Beauty scandals. And then of course we later went into like, did they copy the concept of Beauty Bakery with their Easy Bake powder? What do you call it? I personally think that at the time, Beauty Bakery had very distinct marketing. Was baking new, a new concept? No, that comes from drag makeup mainly. A lot of the popular 2016 makeup trends came from drag makeup, if you're unaware. So the concept of baking wasn't new, but Beauty Bakery did base their entire aesthetic around that, including the bright pastel colors and again, the baking concept. So I can see where there was a bit of overlap as far as the marketing for the Easy Bake powder. And again, those were like the first two controversies I remember Huda Beauty being in. And in general, when a brand, even if it's not really big controversy, but if it's enough that people are speaking negatively about it, I sometimes shy away from purchasing those brands or using those brands. There might be a product that really gets me interested, but in general, I will shy away from those brands. I feel like that's part of the reason that I haven't purchased a lot of Huda Beauty products. And I know some people who have seen my fragrance collection, they know that I'm on KoleMUA's PR, and I believe Huda used to own a portion of KoleMUA, but KoleMUA is really Mona's baby. And as someone who is a twin, who has sisters, but especially who is a twin and who kind of for a lot of our lives got compared against my twin constantly, I like to, especially knowing that dynamic, allow them to be two different people and not necessarily let, especially now that, again, I believe Mona is the one who owns KoleMUA, is running it and everything. I don't want to let what her sister does and say necessarily impact that, because she herself, Mona, hasn't necessarily been in any controversy or anything like that. And it's like, again, it's a kind of touchy subject for people, or, you know, is something that isn't necessarily in the grand scheme of things the biggest deal. But again, as someone who constantly, it was just like being grouped together with my sister all the time, I am very much so a person who's like, let them have their own separate identities. Don't necessarily base what one of them does on the other one, because even between not even just my twin, but like me and all of my sisters, we are all so very different as people. So if everyone judged me by what my sisters did or my sisters by me, like, they would not get necessarily the best indication of who we are as individual people. Anyway, moving along, next we have a discontinued favorite, which is just like Milani. Why would they ever discontinue that? And I've talked in other videos, including my last one, a little bit about controversy Milani has been in, specifically with them making some like weird jokes kind of around the Amber Heard trial and their product being used as a prop to display the type of concealer that Amber would have concealed her bruises with. So some people do kind of put them in the same category as Matte Rife and e.l.f. and it kind of just being distasteful. But the Pure Passion palette and these palettes in general, like the square palettes that they had, these were some of the best palettes at the drugstore at the time. Of course, I have the one that was very standard 2016 warm neutrals. And while I don't wear, I feel like as many warm neutrals. I still do wear colors like this, of course, but I definitely feel like I wear more neutral, like straight up neutral eyeshadows nowadays. So I haven't gotten as much use out of this, admittedly, but again, she's so pretty. The formula was amazing. Again, these were some of the best shadows you could get. And I want to say that the palettes were like $10 to $15, and 15 might have even been a stretch at the time. Again, I think they were closer to like 10. Like, I don't remember paying a lot for this palette. I also feel like this was the best formula that Milani had in their lineup. Their eyeshadows definitely changed. I have some of their other eyeshadows, which I'll talk about in a second, but I have other eyeshadow palettes from them, and I could definitely tell the difference between this formula and the other ones, the newer formula, and I don't even know if that's their newest formula, you know what I'm saying, but their newer formula that I had tried after these were discontinued was definitely more powdery, felt a little bit more chalky. In this palette, some of these colors, oh, there's still a lot of dust here in this little divot. I didn't see that, but here with even some of these lighter shades up here, they didn't look chalky or dusty on my skin tone, whereas some of the lighter shades in their other palettes or newer palettes that I have from them did look a little bit more chalky and dusty. So again, they're not necessarily, like, since then I haven't really purchased, outside of not really purchasing new eyeshadow because I think we've got everything covered here, I haven't purchased new Milani eyeshadows in particular because of the fact that I saw that decline or change. Some people might prefer the newer formula, I don't know, but I preferred the older formulas. I saw what I perceived as a decline in the quality, and of course with the price of everything going up, and again having so much makeup, it doesn't make sense for me to purchase things even just to try out. And I know I like reviewing makeup and stuff like that, but at this point I'm not going to buy something just to try it out, just to have a video on it for everyone else. That's why I'm not really necessarily into buying a whole bunch of new makeup, or maybe I don't do as many reviews on new stuff except when I get sent some things occasionally. But I've been tossing around the idea of doing reviews on older makeup products. Like I did that video on the beauty blender. No one really fucked with it, but it is what it is. Sometimes your video flops, sometimes no one cares, but that's what I've been toying with, maybe doing reviews or videos of my thoughts on products of the past, or like not even products of the past, but just older products, things that aren't sensationalized because they're not brand new. Anywho, if you've been around in the beauty community for a while, you would know that dupes aren't like a new thing. There have been, and it's like the concept of dupes did change over time. Originally in the beauty community, a dupe was just people kind of pointing out, hey, these two products are similar. Sometimes they were like a high-end product and a lower, less expensive product, you know, but it was mainly meant, like the word dupe comes from duplicate. It just meant a product that was, or two products that were similar enough that you didn't need both of them, two eyeshadow shades that were very similar, things like that. And I feel like that has evolved to be, it then evolved to kind of include vibes, I guess, to a certain extent. And then we really started seeing like whole dupe brands pop up. And there was this particular like e-commerce type of website. It was called Shop Hush. And I feel like the people, again, who remember it, they're gonna hear that name and just be like, you know, but there was this website, Shop Hush, where basically their entirety of their website was these dupe brands. And they had reached out to me at one point to send some of their eyeshadow palettes for those dupe brands. And at that time, I didn't have as nuanced an idea about dupes. I feel like my opinion on them has changed, and I could do an entire video on, again, the nuances behind dupes, dupe brands, the ethics behind it, all of that. So if you want to hear my thoughts on that, again, I can do a whole standalone kind of video essay on that. Either way, I didn't have as much of that thought. My idea was just like, oh, especially being a college student at the time who was making $8 an hour pretty much, I thought these are less expensive options for people who can't afford, you know, these high-end brands and who, again, want a comparable color scheme or experience. So they sent some of their items to me. One of the brands was called Bad Habit, particularly, and this is their Aphrodite palette, which is supposed to be a dupe or a clone. And this is where, again, I feel like there's almost a divergence between, is something a dupe or is it a clone? Is it a replica of the original product? The Aphrodite palette was meant to be pretty much an exact replica, and you can tell by the colors in here. Pretty much even similar layouts somewhat to some of the but you can definitely tell that these were meant to be inspired by, ripped off, whatever words you want to use to describe that. However, the thing with some of these dupe brands, replica brands, clone brands, was that not only were the products less expensive, but sometimes the formulas were better. For instance, I've used this palette, the replica palette, more than I've used the Huda Beauty, the original palette, simply because I like the formula of this better. Are they a little bit powdery? You can tell by how much fallout I'm wiping off of the component. Yes, they're a little bit powdery, but the shadows in this original Huda Beauty palette, which was part of the reason I believe it got remastered, were so hard. Like, you had to really dig your brush in. And for a lot of people, that translates almost to a lack of pigmentation. So for me, it was much easier to use this palette because they were maybe a little bit softer. I felt like they had this little fallout here, but it wasn't necessarily super bad on the face. And again, the mattes were easier to work with, in my opinion. They were more blendable. So I found myself using this palette a little bit more. And that is kind of the, again, one of the nuances of dupe palettes or clone brands is like, okay, if they are providing a similar product, like in free market capitalism, if they're able to provide a similar product for a lower price point, or even a better product for a lower price point, even if it is inspired by the color scheme of another product, then, you know, they're kind of, are they just winning at capitalism? And is that necessarily a good thing to be winning at capitalism, even at the expense of potentially ripping off creative, you know, intellectual property? Again, it's a very nuanced subject, but for me, again, I constantly use the bad. I think my neighbor's kids are playing outside, but sometimes when I hear like a child yelling, I get really scared. Either way, what I was, I think, saying was that the Bad Habit palette worked better for me, worked better for my skin tone, worked better for my purposes. So it's like, even to this day, sometimes if I want that color scheme, I'm still going toward the Bad Habit palette instead, because of the fact that I've found it a little bit easier to work for me. Then we've got those Milani palettes I was talking about. These were newer, or were the predecessor of these was the Pure Passion palettes. These were the last, again, Milani eyeshadow. Actually, technically, no. But I have like this face and eye palette, which I don't know, maybe I'll talk about them in both of these videos, considering, let me just grab it. Yeah, we'll talk about it in both of the videos, considering it is a hybrid type of product. And it kind of came out, like, I believe these eyeshadow palettes, which they called the Gilded palettes, came out. These might actually still be available, or they were like really recently discontinued for newer stuff. These will be linked down below if it's not too many characters to link them in the description box, because that's what happened in the, what do you call it, the fragrance video. I just had way too many fragrances and it gave me, like, YouTube gave me the description boxes too long. But otherwise, if you have any questions about these or where to get them, if they are still available, you can also put a comment if I'm unable to link them in the description box. Anywho, outside of all of that, again, the Gilded palettes came out, bought these Gilded palettes and was just kind of like, not really impressed with them. But then they also came out with this all-inclusive, which kind of not really, is it ironic? Or I think this would actually be a actual sense of irony, but it's called the all-inclusive eye, cheek, and face palette, and this was the deep version of it. I'm pretty, yeah, medium to deep, and I think they didn't have any deeper version than this, and like this is the bronzer. Like, I would say everything else fine, but the bronzer in here barely works for me. And anyway, I noticed when I had purchased these, definitely a decline. Like, they weren't bad palettes per se. Let's start with the Gilded Nude. So these are the shades. Are they necessarily anything I feel like we haven't seen before? No, but I feel like it's a nice little cute neutral palettes, but I definitely feel like we are lacking in deep shades with saturation. Like, these are the two deepest shades in the palette. I wouldn't use them necessarily as my deep outer corner, or if I wanted to make a little bit of a smokier look. But then again, it's a nude palette, so maybe that's not what they were going for with this color story. We've got some kind of mauvey pink shades, and I feel like some of the mauvey pinks, even though I can get a good look out of this is where it starts to get a little chalky. Even this shade right here, it's kind of almost like a peachy pink type of tone. It can sometimes come up a little bit like chalky, and also I feel like almost this formula looks thick on the lids, and it's very difficult to explain what I mean by that, but there are just some eyeshadows that literally look like a layer of eyeshadow versus being able to blend and it look almost like less like the product is sitting on top of the eye and more like it is actually melding with the eye, if that makes sense. And these are definitely eyeshadows that I feel like tend to sit on top of my eye versus feeling like it's melding more with my eye. So that, along with the fact that the color story of this palette isn't necessarily anything that I don't already have. It's like, I've kept it in my collection for this long. Could I probably stand to get rid of it? Absolutely. Am I going to at this point? No, because I just like having different products. And again, being able to talk about this, almost it feels more like makeup historian and collector than like over consumer, especially since I have tampered my spending habits. And then we have the Gilded Gold palette, which, while it is different than Gilded Nude, I don't feel like I necessarily needed both. And the shades that I like in this one kind of overlap with some of the ones in the Gilded Nude. So I do feel like we have a little bit more of a bolder palette, but I don't necessarily feel like we have any deeper brown shades. Like, if I put these right up next to each other, you can see that a lot of the shades almost seem borrowed, like the burnt orangey reddish brown in here looks similar to the one down here. The shades in the corners actually look almost identical. We have some gold shades and some like gold-y peachy shades. And again, I just feel like some of the shades seem a little bit recycled between the two palettes. This was at a time where I just kind of bought things to try them out, or because I wanted them, because I had the money for them, versus really investigating whether something fit with the makeup that I like to do and with my collection, and it being something that not necessarily like I don't have a million times over. I do feel like the shades are pretty, but some of them don't necessarily feel the most cohesive. Like, I feel like all of the blending brown tone shades are very warm, but we've also got almost some olivey toned golds, you know, this really like true yellow gold. And I don't feel like the colors necessarily, like I can make a look out of it, but I don't necessarily love all of the shades together. One that probably I wouldn't have purchased if my frontal lobe was a little bit more developed at the time that I did purchase it. And then of course, like I was saying, there's this Milani face and eye palette. Honestly, this is something that I have bought with me when I've been traveling. I think palettes like these can be really convenient if the products work for you. The problem with a lot of them is that the bronzer or blush shade or like some of the face products don't work for everyone. And then especially with drugstore brands, they have the tendency to not really come out with a lot of deeper shades. Like this is the deepest one. And even Milani in general with some of their bronzers in the past, I have been a little bit like, I think we could do a little better with our shade range for these products because they're feeling a little bit incomplete, a little bit like if I'm the last shade or can use the deepest or two deepest shades in your line, then I don't feel like it's really that inclusive. I feel like this is nice enough to throw in your bag and get a very basic look, but a similar complaint I have with it is that the shades just really aren't deep enough. Like I could not get a smoky look from this. If the bronzer were even a little bit deeper, it's almost the exact same shade as this eyeshadow up here. So the blending shade and my crease and my bronzer are essentially the same shades. They seem a little bit duplicative. Is that a word? We could have done even a slightly darker bronzer that could again kind of be used, because technically you could use all of this as eyeshadow, bronzer, like whatever you want, but something just a little bit deeper so that it ranges for more skin tones as well as not being almost the same shade as the eyeshadow. So again, while I have bought this, and you can probably see a little bit of the hard pan as well, but while I have definitely brought this with me traveling because it's so easy and convenient, it's not necessarily my favorite product by any means. Next, we've got one of my favorite palettes, especially for the springtime. If you've been on any of my pages for any length of time, you've definitely seen this in a spring makeup routine, and it is the Colourpop Sweet Talk palette. This is one of the palettes that I feel like came out when Colourpop was at its prime and it didn't feel like they were just doing the same eyeshadow, like color stories each and every time. So this is what it looks like, very peachy, very spring and like fresh. One of my favorite shades in here is this one right here. It's such a pretty glittery, like it's not like these glitters, honestly these two glitters, they're like a gel glitter, and I think Colourpop, because so few people liked those formulas in their palettes, that they did reformulations of them and re-releases to get rid of that formula of them. Again, I don't use them. You can tell that they look used maybe once or twice, but everything else in here I absolutely again love. And this one is not that same texture. It's almost like it's a finely milled, but it just looks so shimmery, and when it hits the light, it just has this ethereal look to it. But again, this is one of my absolute favorite palettes for spring makeup looks. It looks so good, doesn't come up chalky, it's just beautiful. Then we've got the Oma Beauty, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, or you might still be able to get some products somewhere, but it is not in the hands of the original owner. The circumstances under which the original owner passed, very dubious to say the least. But I feel like Oma Beauty had it, like they had such a good foundation for products. They had beautiful products that worked well for all skin tones, and I'm just not really sure what happened outside of learning that being in a retail store like Sephora or Ulta can be very difficult. It cuts into your margins and it's just cutthroat in general. I feel as though Oma was one of those brands that I feel like had all of the pieces to make them a stellar household name brand. And for some of us, they did become a household name brand. This is their Pose palette. It's their Black Magic palette in the Pose shade colorway. I think they had 3 separate palettes of this, and this is just a beautiful, I mean, is it a standard neutral palette? Yes, it is. Like I said, have bought a lot of the same colors and palettes essentially, or shades, over many years of collecting. And I do think I have some shade ranges, or, you know, types of colors and shade colorways. Can we call that for, what do you call it? I know we usually call things colorways for like shoes and apparel, but can we call it a colorway for eyeshadow palettes for simplicity? Either way, there's a lot of color schemes. If I can't use colorway, there's a lot of color schemes that I typically gravitate toward. And again, at the time, it was a little bit more like warm neutrals. Something that I do like about this palette is that they're not too warm. Like, they have a warm neutral vibe to them, but we also have some kind of like ruddy colors. This is these two, I would say, are like the warmest 2 shades. And even this is still like noticeably brown to me. Like, it has a warm orange undertone, but they're still noticeably brown shades. We've got a beautiful gold in here. And then there's also these cooler colors, this blue, which is a very deeply vibrant and beautiful blue, and then a black, which is useful in pretty much any palette. I know some people are like, do we need a black in every single palette? And while I don't think every palette needs a black shade, I do think a neutral palette like this is served by a black shade, because you can use that as liner. You can use it to deepen up some of the other shades if you want to just have a deeper, you know, tone of some of the other shades in the palette. You can also just use it straight up as a smoky black shade. So I really do love this palette, really love the formula. It's easy to work with, and I feel like Oma had everything to be a like well-known household name brand, and it's very unfortunate the circumstances that, you know, have occurred. Then we've got 2 of my Nabla palettes. I have one more of them, but it's a bigger palette that fits in another area a little bit better. But I have both the Dreamy and the Dreamy 2 palette. And this is another instance where, while I like both of them and enjoy both of them, if I had thought a little bit more about my makeup purchases and what I actually like to wear, I would have probably purchased one over the other versus purchasing both of them. If I'm not mistaken, I purchased the Dreamy palette first. I mean, it likely came out first, considering it's the Dreamy and the other one is the Dreamy 2. But I did get the Dreamy palette first, and as you can see, it has a lot of like warmish pinky tones. There's also some purples in here, which I do really like the purple tones. I don't feel like they come off chalky, and Nabla is actually one of my favorite eyeshadow formulas. I feel like they're super slept on, but even some of these lighter shades that almost look a little bit more pastel-y, they don't come up again chalky on someone of my skin tone. So I really appreciate that. While I do like this palette and the color scheme, it's one that, again, I feel a little bit like it looks like some of the other palettes and some of the other shades that I have. However, this is a palette that, again, if I wasn't thinking about having duplicate shades or the same palette or colors over and over again, I would love that one. However, Dreamy 2, I would say, is the one that I personally get the most use out of, and I feel like it is just a little bit more interesting than the original Dreamy. So we do have still some warm tones in here, but I just feel as though there's something so grungy and so like about this color palette. It looks like some of the other shades that I have, but in a more interesting way. And I don't really know how to explain that. Like, we have these shades that are just so pretty and ethereal and kind of have these different shifts of, you know, glitter to them. It's not even coming up as well on camera, but this shade even has like this green gold shift to it. So I just feel as though this one is like a more interesting palette while still kind of maintaining a little bit of neutrals. And I don't know if these are still available. I hope they still are. Again, Nabla has some of my favorite eyeshadows. You can even see that there's not a lot of kick up despite some of these shades looking like dug in, kind of, that there's not a lot of kick up on the palettes, but they're still really easy to blend. Like, they're not hard shadows like some of the other ones that I've discussed. So if there is any brand that I'm just like, you want to get into maybe nicer eyeshadows, more expensive, like you want to try something other than drugstore, but you want something that doesn't feel like you're just paying more for the same quality as drugstore, especially since drugstore and less expensive makeup has really increased in quality along with the price tag of it. I would highly, again, recommend the Nabla Cosmetics palettes. I love them. I'll talk about what is probably my favorite palette of all time later on. And then I have one Natasha Denona palette, which I got years ago, and surprise, surprise, it's the bronze palette, and surprise, surprise, it's more warm neutrals. And while these shades are pretty, I like the palette in general, I don't necessarily, and that's part of the reason why I haven't purchased any more Natasha Denona palettes since purchasing this one. I haven't bought any more because I don't feel like they're necessarily that spectacular compared to anything else I have. There's also Natasha Denona's Allegiance to a Genocidal State that, you know, makes things a little bit hairier, but even before all of that, again, Natasha Denona was not one of the brands that I was really looking at, especially for eyeshadows, because I mean, again, you can tell that I've used this palette, it's pretty, but every single brand, and I mean, at the time, this is what was popping. Every brand was coming out with a warm neutrals palette because that's what the people wanted to see. I feel like it really kicked off with Urban Decay Naked Heat. Everyone was, again, just trying to strike gold or like make their version of that. And this was Natasha Denona's. And I mean, again, it's nice. I do feel like some of the shades get a little bit like repetitive in the palette personally, not just again compared to the rest of my collection, but like in this palette itself. It's not one that I particularly reach for. It's one that I thought about decluttering, but I think the reason I haven't decluttered it is because it is the one product from the brand that I own. And I have to say, it's pretty. Like, it has nice packaging, it feels nice and substantial. This is a really nice mirror and everything. Like, it's nice other than the squeaking. And then the last palette we have in, or actually no, it's not the last palette, but this one may get moved to or the next one may get moved to another basket. Anyway, this is the e.l.f. Retro Paradise palette. It was, again, kind of around, I think I got these like in the same weekend. And as you can see, while the e.l.f. palette definitely has some like fun colors, you see the like warm neutrals in here. Not my light dying. Anyway, it's fine. The rest of the lighting will be good. But this, again, like I said, is the e.l.f. Retro Love palette. Do I like the lighting better without that little light on in the front? I feel like it's actually perfect that it went off, because then I get to see when I'm editing. Anyway, that is an aside that may or may not make it into the video. Who knows? Either way, e.l.f. Retro, what is this? Retro Paradise palette. They were coming out with like this whole Retro Paradise collection, and I feel like people went insane over it. These are the shades. Again, it has like some nice, fun, colorful kind of pool and ocean blues and this green. But the thing is, none of the colors are done particularly well. Like, if I want a colorful eyeshadow look, this is not the palette that I'm going to go toward 99% of the time, because it just, like, there's so much work involved to make them look good, if I'm being honest, especially these two shades, which are the two that I really like the most in this palette and would want to incorporate in like a bright makeup look the most. They just end up being chalky and not really showing up the best on my skin tone and kind of blending away into nothing. Whereas the neutrals in here, shocker, they work just fine. And that's why the neutrals are the ones that you can tell, or this isn't really neutral, but it's a warm tone and it goes with the rest of the warm neutrals. So you can tell that those shades are the ones that I've used the most out of this palette. I do like this disco shade. It's really pretty, but I've wanted to use it with the royal shade next to it. And this is just not a great blue. This is supposed to be a black, but realistically it comes up more gray, which is like some people might like that. But for me, this palette just wasn't necessarily hitting everything I needed it to hit. But that's the first basket. Let me, what do you call it? Clean this out, wipe it out. Okie dokie, and just gonna put them back in, generally kind of in the same formation. Oh, I actually have one more that was in this basket that I forgot about. This is the M Cosmetics Defined Skies eyeshadow in the Faded Clementine color way. Color, what is that? I don't know what other word that I had used earlier, but the colorway for Faded Clementine. And if you're familiar with M Cosmetics, they kind of have their staple shades. Like they have Faded Clementine and like this other one that's like a soft pink, but they kind of make collections based around that shade. And this is again the one for Faded Clementine, which was their more orangey colorway, but they also had some of these like purpley berry shades in it, and it's a very pretty palette. I have gotten a lot of use out of it, but again, it's just kind of those warm neutrals. It almost reminds me of some of the shades in like a modern Renaissance palette, and I'm just not always going for those types of shades at this point. The formula is decent, like the metallic shimmery shades, they're not necessarily like that really reflective or like have the super fine shimmer that, like I said, kind of shifts with your eye. It's just kind of basic and average, and I think that's why I don't use it as much, because it's something that I feel is kind of forgettable. And then of course there's like the M Cosmetics cult allegations, or like Michelle Phan, her being in a cult potentially, or people saying she has that going on. So ugh. And then the palette that I think I want to move along with my other Melt Cosmetics palettes, this is Smoke Sessions from them. Melt Cosmetics has had their little 420 collections for multiple years, or I don't really think they've come out with much. I'll have to see if they're coming out with one this year. But Melt in general, I just feel like, again, they got put in Sephora and they just kind of fell off. I don't even think they're in Sephora anymore. I want to say they're at Nordstrom now, and of course directly through their website. But I think they had some issues with their palettes and quality, and some people had, I think, even some of the Smoke Sessions palettes, which as you can see hasn't happened to mine, knock on wood, but people said that the shades in their palettes were essentially exploding. Like they would open it up and one of the shades would just be absolutely everywhere, and they hadn't dropped it, they hadn't touched that palette in months. And that hasn't happened with mine. I don't know if I just happened to get a batch either before those issues or like after they fixed those issues. I'm not really sure on the timeline of all of that, but I feel like that, along with coming into Sephora and getting away from what made their products different, like people liked the grungy 420 different, you know, type of edgier makeup. And I just feel as though at this point, that's not what people go into Sephora for. That's not what Sephora is trying to put out to their people. I guess it just didn't work. If I'm being completely honest, Smoke Sessions isn't one of my favorite palettes from Melt. I like the colors generally, but I think you can even tell on the shade like how intense the hard pan is. They are very nice and metallic. They're very pretty. I do find these two matte shades to be a little bit more on the difficult to blend out kind of patchy side. And because there are no other, you know, neutral or blending out shades, I do do often have to use this with other palettes. Like there's very few times I can just use this as a standalone palette. So for that reason, I don't get a lot of use out of it. And it's definitely one that I keep more as a collector's item than as a like seriously using it consistently. Even though again, the greens that I like, you can tell that I like them and they're very pretty and they're used, but just not something that I get a lot of use out of. Okie dokie, moving on to my second bin of palettes. This is again more assorted brands. Honestly, I feel like this is the one where I put things back and not necessarily in the best like shape. This first one I have right here is one of the palettes that I think I had out for my fall kind of tray, but then I wasn't really wearing a lot of makeup towards the end of the year and fall and just even last year in general, because everyone who's been here for a while, you've seen the videos, you know what I was dealing with. Your girl was not trying to like be in my apartment like that. But now we're in a new place. We're in a place where I don't have to worry about all of that. And look, more videos, me feeling more like filming and even putting on makeup in general. But I really love this palette. I did get sent it in PR. It is such a beautiful, like, what do you call it? Brights palette. I have used all of the shades in some capacity at some point. Like I just feel endless creativity when I look at this. I'll probably end up playing with this a little bit more in the spring. I want to do some spring makeup looks and summer makeup looks, but I feel like if you're a person who has a lot of neutrals in your collection and you're wanting something that just has a little bit of spice, adds a little bit of zhuzh to your collection, I would highly, highly, highly recommend you try out this palette. And if you're someone who just feels like you want to experiment with color, this is, I think it's technically a pressed pigment palette. I use them around the eyes and haven't had any problems with using them around the eyes, but they're very, very bright, vibrant colors. And that's what I appreciate the most about them. And even though for some people you might think that bright, vibrant colors might be more difficult to work with as a beginner, I feel like when they're really smooth and easy to blend like these are, it almost, even though they're still vibrant, it's almost easier to work with than like a really not colorful eyeshadow and you're like trying to make it look a certain way and it's just not looking the way that you want it to. Another Brights palette, but one that is unfortunately discontinued, and this was such a staple in the community, and it's like I get that people weren't buying bright eyeshadows. Urban Decay was making so much more and was getting so much more publicity for their naked palettes in particular, but I feel like once Urban Decay started going downhill, when they stopped releasing those big colorful palettes each year, I can't remember what they were called, but like the Vault palettes, was that it? When they stopped releasing those, when they got rid of Born to Run, when they got rid of the Electric palette, that's when they started to get boring and they started to go downhill. Like they might have gotten some commercial success, but now they're one of those brands that everyone just kind of reminisce on and is just like, I miss when Urban Decay like looked like this. I've actually done a 3 looks 1 palette using this, so I'll link that if I can find it. I had a really fun time. Again, a video that not many people were fucking with, but I feel like people say they want tutorials and looks and stuff like that, and then when people do them, it's kind of like crickets. This is such a beautiful palette. Again, you can see that I've like scraped products to use them or like scraped them off on a brush to mix with Inglot Duraline, make eyeliners. You can just do so much with these. There's shades that complement each other. Like I can get full looks out of this, as opposed to something like I said with the smoke sessions where I have a hard time making a full look with just this or multiple full looks. I did make multiple full looks with just this palette, and I could even think of more. One that I will never get rid of for that reason, but I also won't get rid of it because my friend, I can't remember whether she purchased this for me or whether she gave me a gift card for it, but my friend and freshman year college roommate, I actually think she might have bought this for me. Because you know what? Thinking about who I was at the time, even though I did do a lot of different makeup looks and I was even doing YouTube, I had a different channel at that time and everything, I don't think this is something that I would have purchased for myself. So maybe she knew me a little bit better than I knew myself back then, but either way, it's one that I will never get rid of for both nostalgia reasons, for personal reasons, because even though we don't talk as much anymore, that person is still very near and dear to me. And I don't think they realize like how much of an impact they had on my life at that time. Again, nostalgia reasons, personal reasons, and also because Urban Decay just needs to go back to being interesting. Then we've got one of my little Colourpop palettes. Colourpop used to have, and maybe they still do, but I don't think they still offer their Build-A-Shadow kits. I feel like a lot of the brands who used to do like build your own palettes have gotten away from that. They either offer their standalone palettes or sometimes you can find single eyeshadows, but I just feel like we don't really live in a single eyeshadow economy if it's not like what is that? I feel like cream and liquid eyeshadows are kind of where, what do you call it, like single eyeshadows have gone. But anyway, you got to like make your own little palettes or pick some colors. So these are some of the, at the time, kind of fun colors. Like I have a watermelon pink and then this like brighter, like these are almost both watermelon colors, but like the more pinky, I guess stereotypical watermelon color, and then like the actual color of the inside of a watermelon. And then I got some yellows to play with because I remember at the time not really having a lot of yellow eyeshadows in my collection, and I was like, oh, let's, you know, get some yellows to play with. But I have another one of these palettes, so I'm going to try to put them together in the same container. We've got my one remaining Fenty Beauty Snap Shadows. Have these been discontinued completely? I know they discontinued some of the colorways of them, but this is the Snap Shadows one, the True Neutrals. I had True Neutrals and Deep Neutrals, and I got rid of Deep Neutrals because it again had one of those like kind of purpley and then warm tone neutral type of vibes to it. And I was like, it looks too similar. Like it looked almost exactly like that Cosmetics palette that I showed from the last bin. So I was just kind of like, ooh, they're too similar to one another. But then that one got discontinued, I believe, first, if all of these haven't been discontinued. And then I was just kind of like, ooh, should I have discontinued, or should I have gotten rid of that? Now it like doesn't exist, and like that type of thing. Then there is this one, True Neutrals. If I'm being honest, something that I bought because I wanted Fenty Snap Shadows, and then I have bought two of the palettes because I wanted to be able to snap them together. And while this is something that, again, it's been easy to bring when I've been traveling, it's kind of a capsule neutrals palette, I wouldn't necessarily say it is my all-time favorite palette to use or neutral palette. I just feel like it's kind of basic and boring, and even the shimmery shades aren't necessarily anything that are, you know, super interesting. I have other palettes with similar tones that I just prefer the formulas of. So while it's, again, a decent kind of palette, would be good for, you know, especially a beginner who wants something that's really curated and you don't have to think too hard about color combinations. But for someone who wants to be a little bit more, even with their neutral looks, a little bit more excited by neutral palettes, again, this is one that I keep because it's a good capsule palette, not necessarily because I keep saying necessarily, but not because I want to use it or get a lot of use out of it. I feel like the Colourpop Nude Mood has very similar shades too. Like if I hold them side by side, again, the similarities in the shades very daunting. These are basically the same palette with the Colourpop having a few more shadows. But if I'm being honest, I personally enjoy the Colourpop palette, the formulation of the eyeshadows, I feel like there's a little bit more interest and even depth with some of them. The shimmery shades have a little bit more of that eye-catching look versus just kind of being like, oh, a shimmery metallic on the eye. This, I would say, is one of my favorite neutral palettes as well, especially when I was in corporate. I got a lot of use out of this as kind of an everyday neutrals, just I need something to put on and go. Though the longer I stayed in corporate, the more I was just like, why shouldn't I be able to wear, or why should it be somewhat of a faux pas to wear colorful eyeshadow to the office, colorful eyeliner and stuff like that, which is why I'm not there anymore, probably. You know, unfortunately, the corporate environment is not one where they want you to realize that you have individual ideas and goals and a life. Anyway, really like the Nude Mood. If I had to pick between the two of them, I would almost always use the Nude Mood palette. The only reason, again, I feel like I keep the Fenty one is because it is so nice and small for traveling. We've got another of the Shop Hush Bad Habit palettes. This is the Inferno palette, which was inspired by Urban Decay Naked Heat. Again, same kind of warm neutrals that we've seen in a million other palettes at this point. But if I'm being completely honest, I really do like the shades in here. I like the way that they perform. It's why this one has been used. Do I wear these types of shades a lot anymore? Not really, but I will say when I do wear these types of warm neutrals, this is a palette that I do still gravitate toward. I think it's really pretty, it blends out nicely, nice and smooth on the eyes. I can't complain about it. Then we've got the Midas Cosmetics Served Soft palette. It's Midas and KoleMUA, and I don't think Midas Cosmetics is one of those brands where like they were a nice indie brand and everything, but I feel like they just had a lot of tumultuous constantly being like, oh, we're going out of business or we're rebranding or something like that. And I believe they were supposed to be rebranding and were supposed to relaunch in like March of last year, but I haven't really heard anything since then about it. So it kind of just faded off, you know what I'm saying? This is a really pretty neutral palette. I do feel like it leans, you know, with some of those warm neutrals, but we've got a little bit of pinky tones. We've got, I feel like this is more straight up neutral, a deeper shade. I feel like the shimmers in here are really pretty. Not one that I've necessarily used a lot, honestly, but I do think it's a really pretty palette, which is why I keep it. Next, we've got another one of the palettes that I've liked to use more for travel because it is a smaller palette and, you know, there's only so many looks you can make out of a palette that is a little smaller like this, and this might be discontinued at this point. It's the Persona Cosmetics Color Theory palette. And this is the Copper palette, which again, do I have this shades or these shades in a whole bunch of other palettes, which is probably why outside of travel, I don't really use this one or get a lot of use out of it. Yes, because I feel like this is one, especially if I want those warm neutrals, I have the warm neutrals in here and don't really need to like take anything else with me, like it's fine. Otherwise, on the day to day, it's just not necessarily a palette that you're getting a whole bunch of looks out of, especially for me. Like this light brown shade is a little bit too light to be a complete transition shade for me, so I have to mix them with the other two. And while that's perfectly fine, I have the skill to do it. Again, I'm not always looking to do that, especially when I have other palettes that I can just as easily pull out and use, and the shade is already there for me. The formula as well isn't necessarily one to write home about. Like it's pigmented, it shows up, but again, even like the metallic-y copper shade isn't necessarily, it's one of those more smooth metallics versus eye-catching shimmery metallics. I believe this is my one remaining Juvia's Place palette, the Nubian 2 by them, and I mainly still have this because I just like the color scheme of it. I don't really purchase from Juvia's Place because they've platformed Jeffree Star in the past very unapologetically. They've kind of had questionable behavior towards Black women, and like even with the whole platforming Jeffree Star, Black women, which is their main audience, I would say, or at least at the time, their main audience, were just kind of like, it's a little bit questionable to, you know, platform someone who says he would like to throw bleach or acid on a Black woman who's been in continual beef with Black women and calling them racially implicated, if not racial slurs, but like racially implicated things like rats and roaches and stuff like that, like dehumanizing them. And with their response just kind of being like, well, he drives in business, so we don't really care. Again, that just kind of turned me off of Juvia's Place as a brand. And it was one of those things where it's just like, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. Even now that I'm opening it up and looking at it, like I still love the color scheme of it. But do I have these shades amongst other palettes? Absolutely. I do think that they have an absolutely amazing formula. Like these shimmers are really nice and smooth. The browns and the deeper, like they show up. That was a whole draw to Juvia's Place for a lot of people, especially Black women, was like having makeup that actually works for our skin tone, that's deep enough, and not having to dip into a million palettes or a million different brands to find shades that will work for us. But it's just like, how can that kind of be your brand mission, and then in the pursuit of profits you turn your back and partner with someone who has, again, not just one instance, but a proven track record of racist and anti-Black behavior. So it's just kind of like, you're kind of a bird for that. And I had, again, more Juvia's Place palettes. I got rid of my Juvia's Place palettes. I don't think I had any other makeup. Like I didn't get to try when they expanded more into like blushes and all of that. Like I just kind of made my line in the sand and said, this isn't a brand for me, even if they are Black owned. Moving into what is possibly my favorite eyeshadow palette, especially my favorite neutral palette of all time, the Nabla Cosmetics Side by Side. It combines the beautiful formula from Nabla that I love, that is so smooth and easy to work with and never looks chalky, but in a neutral palette that is literally like the ultimate neutral palette. Whenever I'm just like, I want a soft glam, natural glam type of look, this is the palette that I reach for. I love that we have warm tones, we have cool tones. There's even like a little pinky tone up here. We've got the deep black to deepen everything up, but I do feel like we have some deeper browns as well. And then the transition shades, even the shade Beauty Mark, it looks like it would be one of those that would be questionably too light for my skin tone, but it does not look chalky on me, even though it's more of a neutral to almost cool tone. I like that the cool tones in here don't come off like chalky or weird looking. This is just, again, one of my absolute favorite palettes, and I could talk about it literally forever. I highly recommend, if you can get your hands on this and you need like a good staple neutrals palette, then like I could get by with this being the only neutral palette that I had if I wanted to. Of course, as someone who loves beauty and makeup, I don't want to, but I could. Then we've got my two ABH palettes. ABH is another brand that, again, all the rage, wanted to try, and then my twin sister got me for my birthday a gift card to use for this. And everyone knows Modern Renaissance. It was probably the original warm neutrals with some purple pinky tone palette, and I do feel like revolutionized the beauty community and the makeup community. Like everyone started going for, you know, these types of palettes and these types of looks. And at one time, ABH, I would say, was almost like the standard for eyeshadows and eyeshadow palettes. I personally don't feel like the formula of ABH's shadows are that great. Like, this is one of the original formulas of the modern Renaissance palettes, and I remember there was a time where allegedly ABH was switching some formulas in their palettes, and people were like, oh, this palette is even more powdery than the original Renaissance palette. And I was just kind of like, well, my modern Renaissance palette was always a little bit powdery. There was always quite a bit of kick up. So I'm not quite sure exactly what y'all are meaning. Like, is it even more powdery than that? And then, of course, there was like the subculture debacle and people basically being like, I'm dipping my brush into this once and it's completely falling apart, or I'm getting pan within the first few uses of using it. So again, a staple in the community. I don't really purchase from ABH anymore because questionable behavior from the owners, you know, and questionable ideas during different times. The last thing that I think I ever bought from ABH was actually the Jackie Aina palette. And I know we would all bring this back if we could. I don't think it will ever happen. But I mean, if we could even just get a semblance of something like this, this is one of those where sometimes I have such a hard time even wanting to use it, because it's like once these shades are done, and I'm nowhere near being done with my palette, even though I've used it quite a few, like you can see me digging into these two shades especially, but I'm nowhere near finishing my palette and it still gives me anxiety to finish it. I feel like this has some similar-ish tones, like the pinky tones to modern Renaissance, but with more saturation. The browns even, or like orangey warm tone browns, have more saturation. And then we just have really pretty shades throughout, like this one, Mink, Mink, trying to read that upside down, but Zam, it's just like so pretty. It's one of those like extra dimensional type of shimmery shades. So again, it's one that I will never get rid of. I'll use it forever. It's definitely one of my more special occasion type of palettes, but if we could have that one back, or again, just the semblance of it, I feel like a lot of us would be in a better place mentally. And then lastly, I have this one, which I'm not gonna open because it is crumbling. There was a shadow that broke and it was like always broken, so I'll have to open this over my trash to clean it out. But it is the Colourpop Mocktail Press Powder palette. They started coming out with these little mini palettes, and it had 2 shimmers and then 2 matte shades, but it's again one of those warm coppery neutral type of shades that I have a million of in my collection. And honestly, part of me, outside of the fact that it's like broken, it makes me want to declutter this, but then I would feel bad decluttering this to anyone where there's like a broken shadow in it. Part of me is thinking like my little cousin is going to be visiting in a few months, and maybe this would be good to give to her just as like practice since she's getting into makeup. I had to adult and go to work, so it's a new day, and I honestly don't remember exactly where I left off, but I think we finished this second basket and I went ahead and wiped it out and everything, wiped off some of the eyeshadows, and this little one that I remember talking about, like this broken shadow, I actually put a little bit of Inglot Durline with some of what was left over after I scraped some of it in the trash, just to kind of congeal it enough to hopefully stay together in the pan. But anyway, we're going to put the eyeshadows back in this, what do you call it? Okie dokie, this is how they're all currently fitting in here. I did leave, like I was talking about, the Smoke Sessions palette out still because I think I'm going to try to rearrange all of the palettes and the different baskets so that I have all of my Melt Cosmetics palettes together, and generally to be a little bit more by brand. Okie dokie, and this is the last basket of eyeshadows that we have. So let's get our wipes ready. Not sponsored by Lysol, though if they would love to sponsor me, I would take a Lysol sponsorship because I use these wipes like crazy. Anyone who is OCD knows that Lysol wipes, antibacterial wipe, all of the things are just like a savior. Anyway, moving along, the next thing we have is one of those Bad Habit dupe palettes. This is the Retro Love palette, and this one was inspired by the infamous, and when I use infamous, I am meaning to use it correctly, as in famous for a bad reason. That's what infamous means, by the way. That's one of my pet peeves, honestly, when people use famous and infamous, or specifically infamous, incorrectly, but that's a whole thing for another day. Hopefully you're watching this video and you're paying attention and now you know to use infamous correctly, or how to use it correctly. Anyway, we all know Anastasia Beverly Hills Subculture palette was infamous because it came out and there were some influencers who were giving it glowing reviews, but then there were some influencers like Alyssa Ashley, I remember in particular, her digging into her palette, or not even really digging into it, like pressing her eyeshadow brush into her palette, and there being so much kick up and so much fallout that she hit pan pretty much on her first few uses in it, and like in her review first impression, like that video. So of course there was this brand, again, dupe brand, that came out with an alternative to it. And if I'm being honest, I'm not mad at the color story. Do I feel like a lot of people did not know how to work with a color story like this? Yes, I feel like that is part of the issue with the original Subculture palette, or, you know, palettes similar to it. This is not one of those neutral palettes that is matchy. There's definitely a bit of grunginess, and I feel like you kind of have to be a little bit more out of the box and creative to work with it, even though I'm not necessarily forgiving the formula. These are a little bit powdery, but honestly, like, the palette's in pretty good shape as far as, you know, there not being a lot of kick up all the way around the palette. So I felt like I got along with this palette, and at first I was just kind of like, well, if this is so similar to the Subculture, I like the color story, so I'm gonna keep using this. It actually kind of made me not really want to get Subculture, because I was like, it seems like I'm having a better time using this palette than a lot of the people who have the Subculture palette. Again, I do really like this color story. I think it's a really pretty fall palette, especially like nice and grungy, but it's also still neutrals in my opinion. Like even these bluey greens, like this is kind of like almost a tealish deep teal green. Like I feel as though it's not really colorful, but it still adds a little bit of interest to, you know, your looks and everything. So I, again, liked the color story of this palette, so I probably would have liked the color story of Subculture, but I just didn't, you know, ever purchase it because I had this one and was getting along well enough with it. But I think I want to put this with the other Bad Habit palette so that both of those palettes are together. That fits. It's a little bit of a snug fit here, but I'd rather do that. And maybe let's take out this little Persona one. And actually, I think that the Persona one is small enough to fit on the side, so that actually works pretty good. Then I have this Honest Beauty one. I think I got sent this through Skeepers, but it's the Honest Beauty Get It Together eyeshadow palette, and I honestly don't even know. I don't even know where you can buy Honest Beauty. I think they used to be at Target, and then I stopped seeing them in the store, like back when I was still going to Target before 2024, you know? I stopped seeing them in store, and then I think I only saw them online, and ever since, again, not really going to Target and shopping there anymore, I haven't really heard much about Honest Beauty. Were they at Ulta as well, maybe? Either way, another kind of neutral palette. I actually do like this palette and think it has a really simple but useful color story. I feel like we've got some nice neutrals. It's more on the neutral to cool tone side, I would say. It's not really like warm tone, but I don't find this to be like so cool toned that, again, it gets like, you can make a grungy look out of this, but again, you can make a really simple, just kind of fresh, like these kind of mauvey tones right here. That makes a good look. And I do feel like the shades show up on my skin tone. They don't look ashy despite them being a little bit more on the cool tone side. I also like that we have the black shade and that they give you like a big black shade, especially if you want to use it for both eyeshadow and liner or more smoky looks. They also give you a kind of like bone shade. So I feel like this is, again, a nice little neutral palette for someone who just wants a staple straight up neutrals type of palette, but admittedly not something that I get a lot of use out of because, as you can see, I have a bunch of neutral palettes. Next is one of my prized possessions at this point. I will never declutter this. I will never get rid of it. It will be always within my eyesight, and it's honestly an eyeshadow palette that I do use a lot. It is the Pat McGrath Labs Bronze Seduction palette, and this is actually the one from like years ago. I bought this, I want to say either in 2019 or 2020. It was probably 2020 because that's when I would have started like my big girl job at the time and had more disposable income. And also I remember getting this on a sale on the Pat McGrath Labs website, because these palettes are usually like 120 plus, or at the time they were. I actually don't remember how much they are now, but I think I got it for like 80 something, which again, for Pat McGrath Labs, especially at the time, that was a huge deal. But I love Bronze Seduction so much. I feel like the color story is, while neutral, it has some pops of color and some interest, some duochromes, and it's just, again, one of those palettes that, while it's neutral, ends up being really interesting, easy to use, and every look that you make with it always comes out feeling unique. Like, it doesn't feel like you could get some of the looks with other palettes for sure, especially if you're using more of the neutral tones. Like, I'm sure we all have a neutrally sparkly, I wouldn't say this is completely taupe, but it definitely leans a little bit more of being almost like a cool toned bronze. We've got a more warm tone bronze, some warm, like this quad in the middle definitely feels like, oh, I could get that in a million other palettes. I've seen other palettes that you've shown that has similar colors to that, but the way that they wear on the eyes, I do feel like they just are different. I know, again, I think there have been some reformulations of their eyeshadows and palettes in general. And of course, we all know Pat McGrath Labs had filed for bankruptcy, and I think they were able to get some other funding, you know, secure some funding to stay in business for now. But honestly, I just feel like I agree with a lot of people saying that the color stories began to be repetitive and there just wasn't really anything interesting. But we can't necessarily, at least at the time that I got this in this specific formula, again, don't know how much different they would be now. But this palette in particular, I definitely think is worth the price. You know, people have been debating, is the price point worth it? This formula to me was worth it. It would have been worth it full price, but especially getting it on a discount, it's like, again, not a palette that I am ever going to be getting rid of. Then this is where we're going into basically all of my other Melt Cosmetics palettes. Like I said, at one point I was kind of a bit of a Melt Cosmetics collector, and then their color stories just started to bore me. And I also noticed with some of even these eyeshadows that I was collecting, the quality of them declining, in my opinion. Let's start with the first one that I ever purchased from them. It was the Melt Cosmetics. Actually, I think the first one that I ever purchased from them was Melt Cosmetics 27. I think they have since discontinued this one. This is one that I don't think they should have discontinued, in my opinion, even though it is still kind of a neutral palette. I feel like it has some warm neutrals, cool neutral, like it is, again, like it kind of reminds me of some of the Urban Decay Naked Heat esque type of palettes that were coming out at the time, but there's just something about this one that when I want that type of look, this is actually one of the palettes that I really do gravitate toward for those more fiery orangey looks and even some like mauvey peachy looks. But there's also, even though I don't use them quite as much as this end of the palette, I would say there's this neutrally cool tone kind of grungy vibe on the other end that I also really like. So I feel like the formula of this is really good. Like all of the mattes are really smooth. The shimmers are buttery and just so easy to work with. You can see how much I've dug into this one in the middle, and you can tell that they don't have hard pan the same as this Smoke Sessions palette. Like my most used in here is this one, and you can again tell all of that hard pan versus this one being used and dug into and it just kind of looking like regular, you know, eyeshadow usage. Honestly, this is one that if you like this color story, if you can find someone selling it secondhand and it's in pretty good condition, I would recommend getting it because again, one of my favorite palettes from them, and again the quality is just great. I keep saying again and just going on about it. And then the next one that I purchased was the Melt Cosmetics Gemini, which they still have. This is the old packaging, so again I feel a little bit like a collector with having the old packaging versus the newer, which the newer packaging is really pretty too, not knocking it at all, but it's just nice to have like the original, I guess, version of it. But also this palette, this actually might be my favorite palette from them. It's between this one and the next one that I will talk about, but it just screams me, I feel like, because we have again warm neutrals, awesome, but these greens, if there's any color eyeshadow that I like to wear when I want to wear color, it's green eyeshadow. Having all of these greens along with these neutrals in this palette, it's again just probably like my perfect palette overall. I know I've talked about some other palettes and said this is like my favorite neutral palette. If I could only have one palette, one neutral palette especially, I would have just this one, specifically referencing Nabla Cosmetics Side by Side. If I could only have one palette for the rest of eternity, it would probably be this one because again, I do feel like I wear enough green eyeshadow to necessitate green being in my everyday shadow rotation. And then it also again has the neutrals in it, and it's one that I often do find myself using it with Smoke Sessions, like as a companion to Smoke Sessions. So this is one that you can still get. I don't know if there have been any changes in formula or quality. I don't have any issues with my palettes. My next favorite from them would probably be the Rust palette, and this again has some of those kind of warm neutrals that I feel like a lot of people are just kind of over, or feel like, oh, everything had to be warm neutrals at this time. But I feel like they did it in a very Melt Cosmetics way, and that the shadows themselves are just so beautiful. This is the last, well, maybe not the complete last palette, but almost the last palette from them where I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, the formula is amazing. I love it so much. Mine is a little wonky because my mirror did break, but since it didn't completely shatter, I just put some tape over it to like keep it from getting in the actual eyeshadow, and I have been still using the palette. It actually shattered when it originally got sent to me. I bought it through Sephora because they had started selling Melt Cosmetics at Sephora, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can get like my discount during the Sephora sale. I could buy Melt Cosmetics products. I think when this launched on Sephora, people were so excited about it that I want to say it sold out, because when I reached out to Sephora about it being broken, I want to say that they were like, you can either just keep this one and we'll give you a refund, or we'll send you out a replacement when it's back in stock. The glass didn't get into the eyeshadow. It had the little plastic over it that I was able to tape it up, and I said I will take the refund and use the palette. And I still have, again, it has these wonderful shades. I feel like they're those warm neutrals, but just done in a Melt Cosmetics, maybe slightly grungy-ish way. I wouldn't say at this point it's my most used palette because I just don't feel like I reach for these shades quite as much as some other types of neutrals, but again, I still do love this palette, and it's one of the ones where I was like, the quality of this is amazing. Then we've got the Gemini 2, which I was just like, you know what, if I have the first Gemini, then I've got to get the second one. And fun fact, I'm actually a Gemini rising. That, along with the fact that I'm also a twin, makes me kind of like into the Gemini themed stuff. Beautiful color story. This one's a little bit more rosy, but we still have some of those greens in there. I like this one as well. I feel like I'm saying the same thing about all of the Melt Cosmetics palettes, but it's just again, a beautiful color story. I feel like I put these away a while ago because I was using them so much, and every time I bought them out in my little like everyday makeup rotation, I was only using the Melt Cosmetics palettes that I was bringing out and hardly ever using anything else. And that's why I kind of put them away to forget about them for a while. But honestly, just looking at them again makes me remember how much I love these palettes and makes me want to use them more. So again, as I said in the beginning, if there's any of these palettes that you want to see 2 looks, 3 looks, 1 palettes with, I definitely want to get back into doing videos like that and just different makeup looks and testing out all of my different eyeshadows and doing looks with them. But yes, this one, again, very rosy, romantic. I absolutely love this as well. And then it was the 420 palette that I had purchased along with Smoke Sessions. And again, these were the 2 palettes that ended me really purchasing a lot from Melt Cosmetics. Actually, there was another instance that caused me to stop purchasing from them, and it wasn't necessarily their fault. It was just kind of, again, falling out of love with the products in general and just feeling as though the quality of them, like I wasn't getting as great quality. Anyway, this is the 420 palette. This was one of their 420 celebration. Like, you know, they have all of these. I want to say that they have both of these palettes on their TikTok shop and on their website, which I've never bought anything off of TikTok shop, but I mean, a lot of people do and a lot of people like it. But I think it's also on their website where they're selling these for $4.20 for 420. It kind of makes me wonder if they're just not palettes that are selling very well, or if they're palettes they kind of want to phase out and, you know, are trying to liquidate them. Honestly, I would say that would be fair, because this is one, again, of my least favorite from them, and it was the ones that kind of made me feel like, okay, is the quality of this brand overall, or of the shadows, starting to go downhill? In addition to, once they went into Sephora, I feel like their color stories were less interesting. They started discontinuing the palettes that people were in love with, that were bright and colorful and things like that, and mostly focusing on their neutral / neutral adjacent, or whatever color stories were really popular at the time. Because, you know, shelf space in Sephora is not necessarily cheap, and you're going to pay for it in one way or another. So a lot of brands, once they do go into Sephora specifically as a retailer, they're kind of beholden. And I mean, it applies to any retailer, but I feel like we've heard Sephora kind of being the worst of it as far as the creative direction of a brand taking a very sharp turn once they are in that retailer. So anyway, this is the color story. One that on the outset looks really beautiful. I feel like it complements a lot of their other palettes, fits kind of the 420 theme with some greens and yellows and then some neutrals mixed in. But these shadows are just so difficult to work with. They're so powdery in my opinion. And then again, we have the shimmers getting really terrible hard pan, which only happened between Smoke Sessions and 420. None of the other palettes I showed you had shimmers with such drastic hard pan on them. As you can see, there's some shades in here that look virtually untouched, and that is kind of because they are. And the ones that have touched, like I have not used this palette enough to necessitate how some of the shades look in here. It's just really powdery, not the easiest to work with, patchy on the eyes. Again, one that I should probably bring out and do like a 2 looks, 1 palette, 3 looks, 1 palette, just to get some use out of it. And it's one that I always am up in the air about getting rid of myself. Both of these, I'm always up in the air of getting rid of because I'm like, I don't use them and they're not my favorite formula. But then I'm just like, the collector part of me wants to keep it because, you know, it's Melt Cosmetics. We also have that shouldn't necessarily be in here, but I think it's in here because it doesn't fit anywhere else. It's a contour palette. So when we do contour products and bronzers and stuff like that, you'll see this again, but I can, you know, wipe it off a little while I'm here. This is another little custom palette from Colourpop that I created. This one had more of those peachy shades, which I'm not quite sure why I did that because I want to say that I bought these around or even at the same time that I bought the sweet, what is that called? It was the Sweet Talk palette. It was going to bother me if I couldn't remember it, but the Sweet Talk palette. So I don't really know why I bought even more singles from Colourpop that were similar. Like literally all of these are very similar to the shades that were in the Sweet Talk palette. So I don't know why I bought this outside of just wanting to try the Colourpop singles that they came out with and do the Gilded palettes and stuff, which is like, it's cute. But again, I hardly ever use these eyeshadows because I have similar shades in another palette that is a little bit more curated. I just don't ever think to use this, but I am going to put it in the same compartment or try to, because I prefer to have these together. Yeah, I'm gonna put that in the same compartment and then maybe switch out some of the other ones that I have so that it'll fit. But I'm just not even going to lie. Like the idea of having your own little Colourpop Z palette, like at the time it was cute and everyone loved it. And I do still think there is a time and place for something like this, but if you already have a whole bunch of other palettes with similar shades, you don't need to create a palette with shades that are very similar to ones you have in other palettes. The younger version of me would have loved to have the older version of me's like mind, you know, but I guess that's part of growing up, is just not realizing at the time, like, hey, I didn't actually need to buy, again, duplicate shades of everything. Even if it's nice to have, even if it's nice to reminisce on, it's still not something that is necessarily getting a lot of use. And then this one, surprisingly, I do get a lot of use out of it. It's the only Tarte eyeshadow palette that I've ever had from them. And I got it in, what was that? I think BoxyCharm. But honestly, I feel like, and I've said it before, I'll say it again here, when Tarte got away from having multiple different collections, and they still do have their different collections, right? But I feel like there is a very heavy focus into the Maracuja Juicy type of thing. When they had the Rainforest of the Sea line, everything from Rainforest of the Sea I wanted. I liked the packaging. They always had these vibrant purples or blues and kind of shimmering scales and looking like fish and mermaids and stuff. I really liked that aesthetic from Tarte. I think they should go back to it. Even this being circular, it kind of reminds me of like a clamshell, like what, again, a mermaid would use underwater to do her makeup. I don't know if I already said which version this was, but this is Rainforest of the Sea Volume 2. It was simple. If I'm being completely honest, is it the craziest color story ever? No, but you can see how much I've dug into and used this. These neutral browns, I use that for like a neutral tone look so much of the time. I also do like kind of these cooler tone shades. I've done some cool looks with them in the past, and I really want to tap back in to those, you know, shades and just going with different types of neutrals, or making neutral looks that just aren't boring, that aren't basic, and that add a little bit of like vavoom to your overall look. But again, I really liked this palette in particular, and I feel like when Tarte again went away from this is when things started to decline. But that is all of the eyeshadows in my baskets, and then I have one last eyeshadow palette. This is the palette that tells everyone that I am a beauty community OG. Honestly, I should have had tickets to Ulta Beauty World based on this alone. The Jaclyn Hill Morphe palette. I purchased this from Ulta when it launched. I was there before the whole, or during, honestly, the whole, oh, there was a change in some of the ingredients where people were like, it seems as though the palette, ooh, some of the Jaclyn is coming off with this, so I'm going to be careful with wiping because it looks like some of the lettering is coming off a little bit by me trying to clean it. Uh-oh. Let me make sure. Yeah, I'm on the soft side, not the abrasive side. Of course, like I was saying, there was like a re-release. Like once this sold out, they released it again and people were looking at some of the ingredients and saying, it looks like some ingredients changed. Did they change the quality of the palette? Is it different now? We also know Morphe was all of the rage. They weren't the first to do these super huge, colorful palettes, but I do feel like they revolutionized them. And I feel like if Morphe hadn't have come out and had their eyeshadows, again, these big multi-row palettes with a whole bunch of shades, a whole bunch of colors, and while this one is definitely leaning more on the neutral side, if you've seen some of Morphe's old palettes, you know that they had neutral palettes, shimmer and matte versions of their palettes, very colorful palettes, like they just did a little bit of everything. And I feel like Morphe is really the reason that brands like Coastal Scents and BH Cosmetics ended up going out of business. Admittedly, I don't get a lot of use out of this anymore, and I don't really follow along with Jaclyn and her journey much anymore. I feel like a lot of us have grown out of her that were, you know, into her, just being completely honest, but it is a palette that I'll always keep. Again, more of a collector's item type of thing, and I can get some good neutral looks out of it, like warm neutrals. I think it's just a thing of me going, again, away a little bit from as many warm neutrals and kind of using more cool neutrals or neutral tones and even just more color. Though when I do want some teal shades, I do dip into the teals down here, especially this shimmery one. It's just so beautiful on the eyes. And that is it. That is in my entire eyeshadow palette collection. I cleaned out this bin and reorganized, put some other palettes, so now I have all of my Melt Cosmetics palettes together, and then I put those like little smaller palettes from the other basket, and then I have my two little Colourpop palettes, and generally everything is organized by brand now. So I am happy with this. I honestly think I'm not going to bring out any eyeshadow palettes for like my everyday eyeshadow tray because I'm liking bouncing around my collection currently. I'm liking going through different palettes. Like I used a different palette today than I used the past few days. And so I honestly have been toying around with taking a break from Project Pan. I might do a video kind of discussing that. But yeah, this is my entire eyeshadow palette collection. I hope you enjoyed seeing what's in my collection and also going down memory lane with me on some of these products and, you know, what the vibe was at the time. I will definitely be continuing this series. Up next, we're probably going to do single eyeshadows, and we'll definitely be doing some decluttering there because I know I have some single eyeshadows that have gone bad. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you're staying safe and healthy wherever you are when you're watching this, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.